Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning, people of LinkedIn. How are you doing? And how's your week been? Good morning, Tash.
Hi, morning
Good
everyone.
morning. We were just commenting before we went live that if we run over time, we may well have a toddler joining us this morning,
Yes.
which that would be a first.
Oh,
It'd
okay.
be
I'm
like
here
that.
first.
It'd be like that, like that BBC, that very famous BBC interview during COVID when the
Yeah, with
kids run
the with
in.
the with the wife pulling, and everyone
Yeah.
assumed it was the nanny. That one, yes,
Yeah.
that
Yes,
one.
exactly that one. Maybe we'll be recreating that this morning. Good morning, everyone. If you're joining us, please say good morning in the chats. Tell us how your week has been. Maybe have you had any? What's been the pit or the peak of your week? If you had any highlights, lowlights. How is the weather? Tash, we were just talking about weather because obviously, I'm here in the UK, so the
Yeah,
conversation
standard.
has to start with the weather, right? But this is more of a global. This is a kind of international LinkedIn Live because you are not in the UK. Tell everybody where you are, Tash, this
No,
morning.
I'm now based in the Netherlands, and
Mm.
interestingly enough, the Dutch are also equally interested in the weather. So the general conversation here, it feels like being at home, to be honest. Yes, I'm
Yeah,
now based in the Netherlands, in the centre in Amersfoort, and we have pretty similar weather to the UK. Kind of
yeah,
either a day ahead or a day behind you, to be honest.
yeah. That's great. Do you speak Dutch?
I can sort of speak it. I can
Yeah.
understand a lot of it. So I'd
Mm.
say general conversations, yes, I can understand, and I'm still
Yeah.
getting to grips with it. But my daughter she understands both English and Dutch equally. She speaks mostly English, but she can also speak Dutch as well. There's every now and then she'll say something, and I look to my wife and I say, she's like, oh, she just said this. Okay, cool. So yeah, she's doing better than me at this rate.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that. And it explains a lot, the fact, and maybe we'll get into like your heritage as well. And it
Yeah.
explains this topic, intersectionality, culture, why all of that is so important because none of us is one thing, right? That is the thing, is it? None of us is one thing.
No.
Good morning. Cornwall is cloudy and non-committal. I love
I'm from
that.
Devon, so I know what that Cornish weather looks like as well.
Morning,
Non-committal.
morning, Adrian. How are you doing on the Cornish coast? And morning, also Sylvia and morning. Very rainy and windy in Cornwall as usual. It always seems to be rainy and
But
windy.
great
Maybe it's just this time of
surfing.
year.
But great surfing
Of
in
course,
Cornwall. So
great for the surf. Absolutely. Good morning, Sylvia, Anna. So I've got Tash Koster-Thomas with me, who's got a little bit of a cold this morning. This seems to be happening. This is just the time of year, right? When
it is.
the germs, especially if you have small children, small people, the little germ carriers, as I sometimes call them.
100% that.
You
100%.
you often end up with that. So thank you for joining me, Tash. How has your week been?
It's actually been a pretty calm week, to be fair.
Yeah,
It started
nice.
quite busy. The Monday was full, and as we've kind of petered out come the
Yeah,
end. So this is like a calm
yeah,
end to my week, I guess.
yeah. Do you know, I'm kind of feeling the same actually. I was talking to a few people this week, and when they were asking me, how has the year gone? How has January gone? I can't remember if I said to you, but I felt like January was kicking my butt, like
Yeah,
in terms of managing time and everything. But do you know what? As we got into after the conversation with you, everything got
chilled.
chilled, smoother sailing. Smoother
I'm here
sailing.
for that.
Anyway, right, let's get into this conversation on intersectionality. So I am with so Tash have a bit of a tradition on here where I get ChatGPT to write your introduction, and
Oh,
you get to rate it out of 10, right?
I'm very
So
curious.
yeah, let's see how well ChatGPT does. So I'm
Okay.
joined today by Tash Koster-Thomas, founder of KT Consulting Limited. Tash is an equity, diversity, and inclusion consultant and speaker, and she's also an LGBTQ plus activist. She brings 10 plus years of experience in this field, and she's known for taking an intersectional, real world, measures based approach to inclusion, including the cultural blind spots that show up in organizations. She's worked with major brands, including Disney and Mercedes, and I'm really glad to have her with us today. Welcome, Tash.
Wow, it did pretty well. The only thing I would comment on for ChatGPT in terms of
Uh-huh.
inclusive language is I wouldn't use the term blind spots. I'd use hidden or blinkers. That's my only.
Get you every day. Every day is a school day.
Yeah, that's the only thing I'd say for ChatGPT. But other than that, the information was accurate. There was no fake news there.
Do you know what? I've started saying in that prompt, I've started saying, don't guess and don't hallucinate. So, yeah. Perfect. And how much would you give chat out of 10?
I mean, I'm going to give it an 8.5.
Okay, the 0.5. Okay, you're the first person to come with a 0.5. I love
really?
that. Yeah. Well, do you know what? And a lot of the reason that I do these conversations, these long conversations, is nuance, right? And sometimes there's an episode of Sex and the City, right? Which any fans of it will know this, but one of the characters says, you know, sometimes a girl needs a half, right? So 8.5, absolutely fine. Let's get into this topic of intersectionality. This is going to be a two-parter. So next week, I have got Jess Rad from the Womenhood, and we're going to be going into different aspects of intersectionality. And this wasn't by design. It just so happened that we've got both of you sort of scheduled like this, or we'll just pretend it was by design. This term, intersectionality, I was saying to you just before we came on air that I saw a post recently where one person was using the term intersectionality and they were almost then being berated by somebody else to say, oh no, intersectionality means this, almost like means this and only this. So maybe let's just talk about, I guess, where the definition came from and that very narrow definition and the Kimberly Crenshaw sort of school of thought around intersectionality. What are your thoughts on that and why it's okay for us to broaden the topic out?
It's a great point. I feel like that's one thing within kind of the EDI space, inclusion space, is that people kind of get really fixed to their definitions and it can only be one way. So Kimberly Crenshaw definition, 1989, Kimberly Crenshaw, a legal scholar, a woman of color. And very much rooted in, and I think this is where people get that kind of frustration, is it's rooted in the Black feminist movement, right? And it's important that whilst we expand a definition, we don't lose sight of where it came from. There's similar things around pride, and you know, we celebrate Pride in June month, and everyone's like, oh, because it's the summer, and actually it's rooted in, again, trans women of color, originated Pride as we know it today. So I think there's something around really recognizing the history of a term. And obviously, you know, it goes back to recognizing the intersections of what it was to be Black and also a woman, and how so much of particularly the feminist movement really only centered white women, cisgendered heterosexual women, and really acknowledging that we face as individuals not one single form of discrimination, but often a unique mix based on our identities. And so I think it's really important to recognize that, but it is also very helpful to expand our definition to include all other forms of discrimination. And there are so many, and there's this, I mean, you've probably seen it circling around on LinkedIn by now, but the intersectional wheel of privilege. And I often use those side by side, right? So we can think about intersectionality from its roots. When I talk about it in trainings or I talk to organizations around it, I always give its history first. I want to really honor Kimberly Crenshaw. And then say, okay, what can we do with this? Okay, let's look at the wheel of privilege and recognize actually our identities aren't just singular. There's a lot of things that impact. So, you know, for me being both a woman of color, an LGBTQ parent, but also speaking English as a first language, for up until now being a citizen of the country I lived in, and now actually my identity shifted. I'm no longer a citizen of the country I live in. I'm now living in the Netherlands with a British passport post-Brexit. My identity is very much shifted. And so we can then expand the definition to consider more than just that narrow frame, and use it for other ways.
Yeah, I love that. Do you know what? I was scribbling down a few things, but I almost want to start at the end. Context. These things are contextual, and this came out actually in the conversation last week. It's almost like the whether something is a privilege or it's a disadvantage, it's contextual to, you know, place, time, you know, so many things that one thing can be a privilege in one scenario and a disadvantage in another context, right? So I think context is important. And then to your point, I love what you said about almost like honoring the history of the definition and understanding that. And I wonder if there's, just to build on that, I wonder if there's something around rather than only taking the literal definition out of the historical thing that you're bringing forward into now, but almost like looking at the principles of it. What is the principle? So,
Yeah.
with Kimberly Crenshaw, I love your explanation of it and where it came about. There was that thing of like layering on, okay, if somebody's, particularly say, for example, in the workplace and workplace equality, if somebody is a female, they have a certain level of disadvantage in that workplace at that time. But also if they're a female of color, you got to layer the two, and recognizing that, and that's the principle, isn't it? Whether it comes to privilege or intersectionality is a disadvantage, it's when you start to layer them. And so I think there's something about, how do we take the principles of these definitions without being so wedded to the
that
literal
one singular.
And it's it can only be that thing.
And I think when you start thinking about the principle of it, it then gets really useful within the workplace when we then are looking at data, for example, and we can, when we start to think, and there's lots of studies out there, and actually to the point, one that I always bring back to when I connect with intersectionality in the original definition is the Broken Ladders report, which was a Runnymede study that was specifically looking at women of colour in the workplace, 2022, I think it was, 2,000 plus women of colour. And I say women of colour, not just Black women, women of colour, across industry and sector. And that really spoke to, there's a very different experience of women of colour versus white women. You've also got the Women in the Workplace 2023, it was a McKinsey study, and that broke down looking at women who are LGBTQ and women of color. So then we started to actually be able to recognize a difference of experience, and that's kind of how we can then use intersectionality in a really powerful way within a workplace setting to really understand the data and the information that we have and the experience of different people.
Yeah, I love that. And that Runnymede report that you mentioned, I don't think I've heard of that one, but we'll have to see if we can find a link and put it in. Did it, when you talk about like the experience for the women of color, did it break it down even further, like into the groups?
The deep down report, I think, if I remember rightly, it was actually more around kind of positionalities, whether you were like frontline, middle management, but there's a lot of sort of anecdotal stories in there, as well as kind of hard figures and facts. And it was just, I think it's a really powerful report. There's a sort of an executive version, but the extended report is a really powerful report just to, and also see a lot of your own experience in it, which is, I mean, it can be comforting, but also quite jarring at the same time when you read through it.
Yeah, it's interesting, and because and the reason I asked about whether it goes into even like breaking out women of color, and then even I would even say even that intersectional lens of social mobility, which is I think something we were talking about in our prep call, because even for white women, for example, that other lenses like social mobility, like disability, like LGBTQ plus, etc., they all kind of like layer on, don't they? And for me, I know when I read the book, The Good Immigrant, the UK version. I had there was a real sort of like light bulb moment in terms of the different experiences of different women of different ethnicities. And I say that as somebody, one of my best friends is Chinese heritage. And I'd never, until I read that book and read some of the essays from Chinese British women, so British Chinese, I'd never really thought about some of their experiences. And then actually, we then actually did a lot of talking about her experiences in the workplace, the fetishization of, of Chinese women. It was absolutely, it was mind blowing. So, definitely, intersectionality, I feel, as a definition starts to get you thinking more broadly. And let's just dive into Adrian's comment here. This is around definitions. I've long felt that definitions need to evolve, and especially evolve to describe the context they're applied to. Universal definitions and how they are used can ignore or diminish people and experiences in local contexts.
Brilliant one. We're going to get into that today.
Perfectly put, Adrian. Perfectly put. So let's just talk about intersectionality. So let's break it down. I know we've dived into it straight away. Just in plain terms, when somebody asks you to describe intersectionality, how do you describe it in plain English?
This is kind of an academic definition. Actually, I give an example, to be honest, of my own experience with intersectionality. The first time I kind of really understood it for myself was back in 2020. So we're in the beginning of a global pandemic, thinking it was only going to last 3 weeks. And at this time, it was also in the June of 2020. So we had the murder of George Floyd in the US and the repercussions of that. And here in the UK as well, right? And I am intersectional in that identity, racial identity. My father is white, my mother is black. And so I very much felt in the center of this conversation of almost black versus white, but I'm black, but I'm also white, and this is part of my heritage. My wife was with me at the time, I was with my parents actually at the time. But I'm aware that when I step into any space, I'm seen as black first and foremost. And during that conversation, I felt very much connected to my blackness. And it was June, which is also Pride Month. So my wife and I actually have an online platform. ChatGPT missed this one out. Breaking the Distance, which is our online platform around positive LGBTQ representation. And so we were sharing a lot on that. And the majority of the homophobic comments we were receiving was from the black community. And so here I was as this mixed racially, but also then feeling connected to my blackness in one step. The minute I brought my queerness into the equation, all of a sudden the same group is kind of ostracizing me. But I'm not one of those things at one time. I'm all of those things simultaneously. And so when I give a definition to people, I kind of break it down like that, is that it's that lived experience of not being one at a time. It's multiple, and how those things interact with the world, but also with each other. They don't always interact cohesively based on the world that we live in and how people perceive you within that world.
No, that's perfectly put. And actually your experience, and just to comment on that briefly, if I may, I think it's not uncommon for people of color, particularly within the black community. So we're talking specifically about the African diaspora around the world, really globally, if you put it like that, to face more hostility potentially within the black community, and that's for all kinds of reasons. But there unfortunately is this legacy, and so you're absolutely right when it comes to that intersectionality. Then when you face into that part of your identity, that community, that hostility is unfortunately there.
Which is the reason that UK Black Pride was created, right? It was an opportunity to acknowledge the different experience of queer people of color versus just general queer people.
Do you think it's a coincidence that Black Pride was created by a woman?
No. Lady Phil is quite literally a living legend. A goddess. No, I don't think it was. And the fact that it's a black lesbian that created UK Black Pride, I don't think that's by accident, because there is historical marginalization of black communities within the queer community for a long time. And so, no, I don't think it's by accident. I think it could have been created by that or trans black women, to be honest. And
also it kind of also links to I promise I'm not going to go down too many rabbit holes, but there is this view of that, certainly within the black community, again we're talking African diaspora, there's this view of like the hyper masculinity when it comes to men, such that, which is probably one of the reasons that being gay is so kind of almost like repelled, right, as a community, because there is this sense of almost you've got to be there is this one way of being a man, like within the black community anyway. So that kind of like just sort of links to that. When it comes to intersectionality within inclusion work, what does good look like, and how do we make sure it's not just a tick box?
Great question. Probably it's interesting. It's one of the hardest things that I think organizations find. I think first and foremost, it's about just having the conversations, actually making sure that everybody in your organization understands what intersectionality is and what we're trying to achieve with it. And then it's around, so often it's like, oh, we have our Pride network, we have our disability network, we have our women's network, and that's the tick box element of it, right? They're all sitting in their silos and we have all of them, we've got all the logos for all of them, so yay, we're doing intersectionality. But none of them are talking or communicating with one another or sharing experience, right? And so, and also we look at our policies and we go, okay, we have things like we have maternity leave, and we're only still calling it maternity leave, and we're not thinking about and it only really benefits with cisgendered heterosexual women, and we haven't thought about, what happens if I'm a father, what happens if I'm a father in a queer relationship, all of these other things. And so even our policies are still, and I think quite often organizations sort of get a little bit fearful, because it's nice when a policy is really neat and tidy and you can read it and it makes sense. But now we have to think of everybody all of the time and every different combination, and that feels intimidating. And it's not that you have to think of everybody necessarily, but it's parental leave, carers leave. I'm not pinpointing that relates to a parent, a biological parent, an adoptive parent, foster parent, like we've opened and broadened up, and then and when we do, we will have to somewhat look a little bit case by case, but at least we've considered there is a broader spectrum of just this one type. And so, but so often it feels like intersectionality is this thing that sits only at certain times or for certain demographics, and we don't necessarily consider it in every aspect of how we're talking about ED&I. The training that we have, it's sexual harassment in the workplace focused on women experiencing sexual harassment, and it's like one demographic. It's not thinking about women with disabilities, queer men, Black people. Like it doesn't. It's still looking at a singular lens, which tends to be white cis heterosexual women in the workplace facing sexual harassment, right? And so even those kind of general programs that we have we extended the lens? When we think about events, we think about the most popular, the demographic who has the majority of success characteristics within our organization. So it's a networking event that's considering somebody who is confident, outgoing, extrovert, who's happy to stand up and share their opinions. We haven't thought about someone who's neurodivergent or has a physical disability, or, is new or is lower in senior position, like all of these different things. So it's applying intersectionality, not just within ED&I, but actually across everything that we do.
Across everything. I love how you've summarized that. I mean, everything. Wow, there was a lot there. I was like
caught me at like first thing in the morning on a Friday.
You've had your Weetabix today for sure. There was a lot of things in there, and it's interesting. I think you sort of started with networks and how sometimes there is this danger that they are siloed, and I think you're absolutely right. So often one of the first things I ask an organization when I go in is, do your networks even meet? Like, are the network chairs meeting to like plan their attacks? So if, as you say, if somebody's going to look at a policy, all of you look at it like together, like think about the needs
and just
and
the disability policy just for the disability ERG.
Exactly.
Right? And I'm curious, percentage wise, how many of those organizations would you say yes, they do communicate on an average?
I mean, I would say it's maybe about 50-50, right? That have like a regular meeting. But here's the thing, even of the ones that have the regular meeting, then they're not really doing work, right? As I would call it. They're just like telling each other what's in the calendar. They're just like, oh yeah, next month we've got that. And then maybe the next level is, some of them are like, oh, should we collaborate on that event? Right, you bring the cupcakes and I'll do the whatever.
And we'll do the banners.
And that's, but that next level of like really even like co-designing, like co-designing an event where you consider the needs of all of the people that might be coming and at the intersections. It's rare to, I can think of a handful of organizations, but really a lot of them are just starting, and I guess, maybe I'm being harsh because, for some organizations, this is relatively new, but Tash is thinking you're not being harsh. You need to be firmer.
No, I just think it's one of these things that, I mean, there's a line, right? And that's the thing is, I feel like, when you're in the work all the time, it feels like just a certain level of common sense. But I think it's really interesting, 5 years ago, intersectionality was quite a new term for people outside of ED&I. 1989, the term originated, just to put it out there. It's as old as I am, quite literally. You kind of gave grace 5 years ago. And I'm like, we're really far down the path. And I'm like, there are really, you know, a big thing for me is we're coming into February next month, right? It's UK, it's in the UK, it's LGBTQ History Month. In the US, it's Black History Month, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, there's a perfect synergy right there of two ERGs that could work together, right? And to me, when there are these really key, easy wins, low hanging fruit, and it's not happening, I'm like, that's a real kind of key indicator to me. Like, why isn't that a thing in your company right now?
Yeah, and for so many reasons. I mean, you know, sometimes the networks are too busy competing and all fighting for resources, right? Or saying, leave at that, whatever night I have that.
So
true. It's but you know, the things that you mentioned, policies, events, interventions, training, all of that. And even, you know, you mentioned data as well. Anyway, the data is key, like the data bit, as in you know, where you can, you know, look as intersectionally as you can within the data to make sure that the interventions you're proposing, whether it's a training or development or mentoring or whatever, you really understand where the need is. Because if you just treat your groups as a monolith, especially if you are in it, if you treat all women as a monolith or all disabled people as a monolith or whatever, you will be missing something. So definitely, you know, if you can get the data, I know it's tricky getting this sort of data right. It just is GDPR and all that, but
it's interesting. There was as an organization, I was delivering a training course and it was for lots of different organizations, and one person shared an example of exactly that. So they were looking at exit data for their company, and when they looked at exit data, if you looked at it on face value, it was like, oh, people in there was a high turnover for a certain position, but it was quite a entry-level position, and they were like, it's just that position that has high turnover, probably whatever was the assumption. Then they delved into the data. They were like, oh, it's actually predominantly female. Let's take it a step further. It's predominantly women of color, accounted for like 60% of that high turnover. That's very different data to, oh, it's younger people. Now we know specifically it's young women of color. And then we look at our senior leadership and we're like, oh, we've been wondering, why are we not getting more people of color and women of color in senior leadership? Well, they're all leaving within the first 3 to 6 months of being here. What do we now need to do as an organization in terms of ensuring that we retain that staff? Because it's a very specific group who are leaving. So that data then becomes so rich when you use intersectionality with it. It's not just to say this monolith. All of a sudden you can really design your strategy to then have an actual impact rather than just throwing and hoping something sticks.
100% as well. And that's part of the reason that I actually think that many organizations do not have men's networks, because they're not looking at men intersectionally. They're not using an intersectional lens when it comes to men. They just say, you know, looking at men as a monolith. But when you look at intersectionality, there's a lot of need within that community.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm trying to delve back into the comments. So, Sylvia, Anna, and Adrian, you guys are on it today. I love this. I think so. Sylvia, Anna was just commenting around, you know, you explained your the sort of post George Floyd experience. Interested to hear how you were able to overcome that emotionally or juggle that. I don't know whether there's enough time to get into that.
Therapy.
We'll see.
I mean, that one, to be honest, actually, it was post that. There was a moment in the initial kind of aftermath of that, of feeling the impact of like, and being kind of marginalized from every different direction. But then, and it sounds like a real cliche, but it was the first time that I realized actually it can be my superpower. It's having all of these different identities give me almost like a huge well of empathy. And it was a massive driving force to really take what had up until that point been a lot of sort of advocacy and activism into real tangible, like, let's turn this into something. So I think there's one side of it that, yes, is boo-hoo-hoo, and I very much still sit in that sometimes. But it's also enables me, like, I don't have the lived experience of being neurodiverse or having a disability or being from a socially lower class background. But I've faced discrimination on loads of other counts that now give me a certain level of recognition and acknowledgement for that experience and the barriers that those people would face. So that's kind of a pivot point.
Perfect. And I'm just going to dive into the comments really quickly. And then we've got to get onto culture, because I know we have got a hard stop. I can hear your toddler in the background.
It's all right. It's all good.
Adrian was saying, yeah, we can all be many things at once. We're not one thing at a time. Gross-Fugel, who I haven't heard of, talks about how the many sections in intersectionality as entangled. The tendency, certainly academically, is to think of the sections in isolation or one at a time, but the different elements interact with each other. Absolutely.
1,000%.
And then the question here, what do you think are the invisible barriers that stop ERGs from collaborating? Your thoughts on that first, Tash?
Question. I think there's lots of different things. I think first and foremost, you have to remember that ERGs are acting aside a job. And so they put their ERG first and foremost. And so the idea of then collaborating feels like an additional step.
Agreed, yeah.
Budget resource can feel like, we have to do this for us in order to make sure that our people get the right level of budget. It can sometimes be just general, like sociopolitics come into the workplace as well. And there can sometimes be, personally, I don't really like that chair, and that then impacts how well you work together, right?
Yeah.
And also if it's not being supported by senior leadership. So if senior leadership aren't making that encouragement or aren't creating a space for them to have, I think we should have all of the chairs as a committee. We want you to meet once every quarter so that you can really work together. And that isn't being something that's seen as important, then it becomes very hard. So those are just a few of the barriers that I've witnessed in supporting organizations.
Yeah, I agree. The best way that I've seen it done is really when it's built into the structure. And by that, I mean, for example, within the committee or the co-chairs, especially big organizations that have 3 co-chairs, for example, 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Try to get intersectionality within those individuals, right? So try to get it right at the top, or at least within the committee, so that they're going to be thinking about that and more likely to reach out to the other networks, even having individuals that have maybe sat in the committees in the other networks. I have seen that tends to drive more collaboration. And then there's an organization that I'm aware of where they actually have specific roles that sit cross ERG.
Love
and
that.
Their only focus is to get the ERGs
collaboration.
To coordinate. Yeah, that's their only focus. So that's another way of doing it as well.
There's 2 organizations that I've worked with the end of last year who they had ERG days, and that day was dedicated for all of the committees of the ERGs to come together one day and have a day of training and collaboration as one day, which they're doing like once or twice a year.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, great. Let's talk about culture. Because culture, it sometimes gets missed in this. So let's just kind of define it and maybe talk about why it sometimes gets missed in inclusion. Because culture, as we were talking about, is not the same as ethnicity, right?
No,
necessarily. Yeah.
So we have kind of culture, and we think about organizational culture, and that's kind of one way that we often think about it. And I'm going to step aside from that, although it does connect to this kind of overarching. So we have sort of culture on lots of different levels in terms of when I'm going to speak about it. We often think about culture in terms of global culture. So what it means to be from the UK versus the US, British versus Australian, right? And there are certain cultural references that we have and traditions, and we often think about it through the senses: the food we eat, the clothes we wear, the music we listen to, the language we speak, and we don't really go beyond that. But actually culture can extend much further. So we have things like cultural values. This is your way of seeing and perceiving the world as what's good or right or correct, and that's taught to you a lot of the time through our global culture. So whether that's being British, we're generally actually quite a huggy nation. So when we meet people, it's quite standard for us to generally hug. Certainly if it's somebody that you've known for a while, or it's a colleague, hey, how are you doing after the weekend? Versus in the Netherlands, 3 kisses. 1, 2, 3. When you meet people, right? So that was, I learned that the hard way with my father-in-law. I thought it was going to be 2, it was 3. So there are certain things that you learn culture in that way. We also have regional culture, which is what it means to be from the north or the south of a country, or even a city, or from one city versus someone. So if someone in Spain, you'll know the difference between what it means to be from Barcelona versus Madrid, right? Manchester compared to London. There's a certain different culture between those 2 locations. And then you also have domestic culture. So this is anything from what it means to be a woman, or to be a person of color, to be a parent, to be neurodiverse, to be LGBTQ. And within those, we've got our own kind of cultural frameworks, and that can be the language that we use, the things that we understand. And interesting, I was on a call the other day, and it was, there were people who were parents, but they had slightly older kids, and they were talking about TikTok crazes and things that were going viral. And that in of itself was a level of understanding that people with teenage children would understand. And I was like, I've got a 2.5-year-old. I'm in the era of Paw Patrol and Unicorn Academy, which if you don't have a toddler, you're like, what's that? Right? So that's a culture that I'm a part of, being a parent of a toddler. And so these are kind of the ways in which we kind of develop, and there'll be aspects of our culture that feel really fixed and really hard and fast. And there'll be aspects of us that kind of will shift and will change and will adapt. And we often hear this term cultural intelligence, and there's lots of different ways that you can break it down. But most simply put, it's your ability to navigate different cultures. So recognizing your own, and then how do you shift or adapt or acknowledge the different cultures that you're interacting with day to day. And there'll be hundreds of different cultures that you're interacting with day to day. Do you sit there and go, that's wrong? Or do you acknowledge, that's a different way of doing something? Okay, that's new. I'll adapt to it.
Yeah. And how culture is, you know, the role that it plays in, for example, that sense of belonging, you know, whether people feel included, excluded, how it affects their sort of like, you know, their progression through an organization. It feels like, because obviously culture per se is not a protected characteristic, right?
No.
And neither actually even is class, right? But culture does affect something. I'm reminded of I was in a conversation with somebody where somebody used the term queer coded, like they described somebody as queer coded, and they were talking about the so almost like the disadvantage or the stereotype that came with that. So it wasn't the identity per se, it was the fact that, you know, in the way that they dress and expression, etc., queer code, which I thought was, for me, that was interesting in terms of, because actually you could have somebody who's straight who comes across quite queer coded, right? And then how that then translates into how they're treated in the workplace. So it's quite complex, isn't it, from an inclusion perspective?
It's really complex. And actually, I think the way that we've often measured or tried to overcome it is doing the whole cultural competency bit and like dumping information on people and trying to teach them about the difference. And it's impossible. You can't learn everything about everything. And actually, I think the better way to approach it is with cultural humility, which is kind of the opposite side. So this is a term originally coined in the US from the healthcare system, actually, by Jan Murray Garcia. And she was in partnership with somebody else, and it's gone from my brain. Again, 80s, early 90s, late 80s. And it was around cultural humility, is around, okay, you have the cultural competency bit. You've started to acknowledge a difference. If we're talking about global culture, right? I'm acknowledging that this country, you know, does this differently, or this is kind of seen as a mark of respect. Giving direct eye contact is seen as confrontational. And so maybe I avert my eyes. I recognize those things. However, I can never be an expert in that culture. I'm not from that culture. I can only know certain things. I'm a tourist, right? And so cultural humility is about recognizing the person in front of me. And whilst I have this background knowledge, actually I take the information from the person in front of me. It's about recognizing my own cultural framework, my own perception and view of the world, understanding that, and then having the willingness, desire, and want to learn from the person in front of you, also whilst respecting how they do things. And I think actually a true measure of, you know, how we can then start to bring cultural competency or cultural awareness into belonging is actually teaching humility first and measuring how much humility we have. How much do we acknowledge those differences? So often I see in organizations, when I talk about culture and cultural humility, people go, oh, light bulb moment. I thought I had a personality difference with that person. Actually, it was just a cultural difference. And sometimes the most basic way to demonstrate it, and think about this for yourself, right? You have a 10 a.m. meeting in person. At what point do you think you're late for that 10 a.m. meeting? You arrive at 10 to the hour, 5 to the hour, 2 minutes to 10, 10 o'clock, 2 minutes past 10, 3 minutes past 10. I've done this in a room, and I've had people, I've got everyone to stand up and then sit down at the point that they were late.
Wow.
I've had people sit down at 10 to 10, and I've had people still standing at 7 minutes past 10. That is a 7-minute difference between late. And so can you imagine that in a workplace? You've got this person going, they don't respect my time. They always turn up late. And you've got someone else being like, they're trying to catch me out. I don't know why they're so strict. Like every time I arrive in the room, they seem to be really annoyed at me, and I don't really know why. They obviously just don't like me. And it's because culturally they've been taught 10 minutes before the hour is on time. It's okay. You grace period. Class is all right. And so culture can play a huge role in our just everyday interactions with one another.
Yeah. Let me just clarify for anybody watching, right? I heard a really interesting saying recently: 5 minutes early is 10 minutes late. Get to meetings on time. If you're going to meet with me, get there on time.
Right?
Yeah.
But if you're working with somebody else, they can be like, what are you talking about? Right?
Yeah. Yeah, I love what you know, I wrote down so many things that you said there. Culture, it's and let's move on really quickly because I know that you're time bound, right? But this is a real challenge as well and obviously you are a global citizen, right? You're the personification of that this morning. And Adrian has put in the comments here around cultural humility, making the boundaries of the ways you would hold culture porous and non-hierarchical. I love that in terms of how you summarize that, Adrian.
Yeah.
This is a real challenge for global companies in particular. So how do they do this learning in a way that is, you know, I guess bringing in that cultural humility rather than, you know, we all know about the books that are like, oh, if you're dealing with Germans, do this. If you're dealing with the French, do this. If you're dealing with Americans, How do companies do it and do this like cultural awareness training in a way that is, you know, a bit more nuanced and recognizes individual differences as well, rather than just being this textbook view of, you know, if that, then this.
Yeah. And I think first and foremost, the organization has to recognize its own cultural framework. So we can be a global organization, say, for instance, like Apple, but we're rooted in the US. A lot of what we're teaching comes from a US Western framework, right? So we're doing Apple in Southeast Asia, but it's still with a US lens. So first and foremost, recognizing, okay, whilst we're trying to be multicultural, we have to acknowledge our own cultural framework with humility. And we're going to be honest with that. Okay, so now we can start to consider from there, what are the adaptations that we now need to make in order to really land in that local region? And it's about, rather than impressing and forcing, well, this is, and I'm not saying that, ironically, I worked for Apple, right? So I'm not saying that Apple does this in terms of like, you have to do things our way, but it's about recognizing, okay, I want to learn from you. This is how we do it with our US audience. Would this land with you in India? Actually, no, it wouldn't. You know, I even think to the point of, it's funny, US, you know, retail is very much, you walk into a store, hi, how may I help you? Hi, how are you today? How may I help you? Is natural. As a Brit, why are you like, right? And so working in the Apple store in the UK, it was a really like confronting. You can literally see Brit people like, why are you approaching me? And so there was this kind of, you have to sort of find a way that actually I'm going to leave that person for a little bit, and then I'm going to come up to them and say, hi, do you need any help? Versus the minute they've stepped in the door, hi, how can I help you? Because that's the kind of cultural difference there in terms of different locations. And so it's really, as an organization, you first and foremost have to kind of see yourself as a person. What cultural framework am I working from? Where are we HQ'd? Where are we founded from? And how is that impacting the rest of the organization? And then in the locations that we're in, how do we adapt to be more relevant and supportive of that individual location?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's such an important topic in terms of especially for global organizations. We did the ERG Leader Summit in Dubai in November, and that was one of the topics. Obviously, they've got a melting pot of cultures and nationalities and ethnicities, and so they were really keen to talk about this as a conversation, because it can create a lot of challenges within the workplace. You know, everybody kind of like looks at it from afar and thinks, oh my gosh, how do they do it? It looks amazing. It's not easy. You know, it does take a lot of effort. Sylvia Anna said here, with my trauma-informed hound, there is something about a sense of inner safety with differences that is necessary to invite cultural humility. That makes a lot of sense, Sylvia and Adrian. I have a slide about time and how it's experienced or perceived by different cultures. Yeah, don't get me on it. Don't get me on that one.
My own family is that. I'm like Guyanese family. They're rocking up for a lunch date 2.5 hours later than you said. Dutch family. They're ringing the doorbell on time. Exactly the minute that clock hits, they're ringing the doorbell. So
yeah. And I actually once heard somebody say, I think I saw it on a video. I think somebody said that being on time is something like being on time is white supremacy. But anyway.
That's a whole nother. I mean, coming from having a black background, like no family member is ever ever on any kind of thing.
I'm gonna ask you the last question because I know you've got it head up. If for networks in particular, so ERG leads and sponsors, if they could do one practical thing to bring more culture into the inclusion work, and I say a little bit more intersectionality as well, what would it be, and how can they measure whether it's working for different cultural experiences?
I think get everybody in one room together. Having those leads and sponsors, I think it's one thing. It's interesting, the role of sponsor, and I see it show up in so many different ways within organizations. I've seen the really dedicated because they have a personal connection to the ERG sponsor. And then I've seen the like, I'm sponsored by title, right? I'm just
on a slide.
Literally, and no one's ever spoken to you, and you don't even know that you're still the sponsor. And I think there's something around not just the ERG, like the chairs and the co-chairs having that conversation, but the sponsors having that conversation. Often they're in a boardroom together. And so really understanding how are we recognizing this conversation around intersectionality? How is different cultural experience impacting the lived experience of people in our organization? And I think that we sometimes, I know it sounds really complicated. It sounds like this really, oh man, there's so many different layers to think about, and so it's just having conversations. It's actually just having a conversation with another person and understanding their experience. And I think there was experiment study kind of thing done. I think it's Denmark, where they had the human library, and it's actually a project you can go online, and literally they had it in situ, where you could go into the library and there'd be somebody sat with a placard in front of them. It'd be like immigrant, parent, and you go and have a 30-minute conversation with that person about that particular aspect of who they were. And so you could start to learn, ask them questions, find out. And I think ultimately that's where we learn. We then start to think about, we're planning this event. Oh yeah, but I spoke to this person the other day and I remember them saying they really struggle in loud environments. So is there any way that we can make something quieter? And it's through humans. We interact with stories, and when we can hear each other's stories, those are the things that really cement our learning and our understanding of one another. And so finding ways that we can share stories around our lived experience, I think helps tie all of this together in a way that a PowerPoint presentation just can't.
Yeah, it really does. The stories, and for me, it linked back to what you were saying in terms of even those things around culture, the senses and how we kind of experience the world around us, but then there's other things that are overlaid, and often those stories are actually the vehicle that kind of brings it all together neatly, and it's easier for people to remember and all of that. And what you said about the human connection, so absolutely getting your people together. I love that example you gave of a client that literally gets everybody together for a day, get everybody together and the sponsors together, as you say, to talk about these things and talk about how the networks can work more together, and thinking about culture as this hidden aspect that we don't consider enough. I'm going to leave you to get going because I know that you've got a whole toddler to go and manage.
I'm sad. Sorry, she didn't make an appearance. She's probably eyeballs deep in Paw Patrol right now. So
yeah, absolutely. Honestly, Tash, thank you. Brilliant last point. Thank you there, Sylvia and Tash. Thank you so much for joining me all the way from the Netherlands this morning. Honestly, it's been brilliant, and I know that you had a bit of a cold as well, so thank you for battling through.
No sneezes. Yes.
But Adrian and Sylvia Anna on the Cornish coast, you've been like the faithfuls with us from the start to the end. Thank you so much. And I love so many of the references that you gave. if I have time later today, I'll drop those in the comments as well, because there's definitely some of them that I want to delve into myself. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Much. Adrian and Sylvia Anna, have a fabulous weekend, and I'll see you next time. In fact, Adrian, you're going to be on here soon in a few weeks, so we're all looking forward to that.
Oh, I haven't watched that one.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Tash. Everyone have a good one. Bye.
Bye.